Hello and welcome to another episode of the Driving It Home podcast, where I take lessons from Chris's latest sermons and help to drive that lesson home. This week, Chris taught a lesson on fear, as fear is this giant that we all have in our lives, and this lesson was a part of Chris's sermon series, Facing the Giant. So it makes sense that he would talk about fear because it's a giant thing in our lives, and it has been for like ever. Fear has been around since the Garden of Eden. It's the very first negative emotion ever recorded in Scripture. So it's not something new. It's not something that you should be surprised by, and I don't think it is something you're surprised by. But it's something we all face, whether it's a big fear, small fear, something in between. Like, we all have things we face in our life that give us this sense of being afraid. And so the question is not, okay, will we face this? Because everybody faces it, and everybody who ever lived has faced it. So the question is, how do we deal with it? Like, how do we overcome it? How do we get through it? And that's the answer that we get from Scripture that Chris brought out for us in his lesson. And the answer of how do we win this battle against fear is faith, right? And so it's like, okay, yes, we're in a church. We saw that one coming. But how does faith help us overcome our fears? Well, when our faith is strong, it allows us to see who God is. And when we know who God is, that means we know what He's done. And hopefully when we see what He's done, we believe in what He has promised that He will continue to do. And all of those things put together, who He is, what He's done, what He will continue to do, that gives us faith. That strengthens our faith. And that's how our faith overcomes fear, is when we examine our fears in light of who God is, then the fears become less scary and our faith grows in the process. How fun is that? That's just great. That the Lord knew we were going to face something and He gave us a way through it. It's like a shortcut. People say there's no shortcuts in life, but if a shortcut is just a faster way to a better life, then how is the Bible not a shortcut? Like, it is. You wouldn't come to these conclusions we are given in Scripture on your own if you hadn't heard of the Lord or hadn't heard of Christ. So learning about these things through the Bible is a faster way to a better life. So it is kind of a shortcut. And we're so thankful. I'm so thankful that the Lord gave us this, because fear is something that we all face. I wonder how many times I'm going to say that phrase in this podcast. Why don't you guys keep a tally? And if it's more than 5, then you should make me do something. I don't know. But anyway, so here's a good question to ask. When we talk about fear, there's a plethora of things that could qualify as a quote-unquote fear, okay? And I like to use that word plethora because it's my way of letting you guys know that I know what that word means, and that's important to me. But there's so many things that could be fears. So it's like, okay, what fears is Scripture talking about? When it says fear not, okay, but what level? Like, what's the line of what's just a caution, a precaution, or a concern versus an actual fear? Like, where's that line? And this is what I would say. This is the fear that Scripture is warning us against time and time again, over 300 times that it's warning us against. And what that fear is any fear that gives us spiritual amnesia. And what I mean by that is a fear that makes us doubtful of the Lord or makes us forget who He is, and kind of turns our focus onto something else, and where our worry outweighs our faith, or our fear outweighs our faith, and our worry outweighs our trust in the Lord. It's like any fear that does that. Okay, so if you have a fatal peanut allergy and you're concerned about the cookies at the church potluck, like, hey, I need to know if that cookie has peanut butter in it before I shove it in my face hole, that's probably a good concern to have. Jesus isn't saying, just try it, man. Like, fear not, just go for it. Like, He's not saying that. He's saying any fear that causes you to doubt who the Lord is, because that's what fear does. It gives us the spiritual amnesia. It gives us doubt. It places these thoughts in our mind of, man, is the Lord bigger than this? Because this fear seems really big and powerful and all-consuming, and it's like it consumes us. And it overpowers us, it overtakes us, and it causes us to drift further from the Lord rather than closer to Him. So the action step I want to give you this week of how do we overcome that? Yes, we know the answer is faith and having a strong faith, but then the question would be, okay, how do we strengthen our faith? So that's what I want to give you this week is an action step that is a faith-building exercise. And it's something you could take with you for the rest of your life, okay? So here's what the assignment kind of is. And it's anytime you start to feel that fear, you recognize there's something in your life that's been pulling my attention away from the Lord. It's been pulling my trust. It's been draining it and causing me to have doubts. Anytime you recognize that, what I want you to do is put words to that fear, because sometimes fears can just grow rampant in our mind and it becomes huge and out of proportion. And so when we put words to the specific thing that we're afraid of, it helps us to kind of bring it back down to its real size. And that doesn't mean that you're belittling the fear, that your fear is not valid. That's not what I'm saying but what I'm saying is when you put words to that fear, it will help you to understand, what am I actually really worried about? Like, what is causing me to become distracted in my faith? And so that's kind of one utility of writing it down, is it helps you to actually verbalize and process and think about what's really making me feel this way. But then it also serves as a compare contrast, because the other part of this assignment is I want you to write down who God is. Like things you know about God, things you believe about him, things scripture says about him. Like define God to the best of your ability on paper. Actually write it down so you have it visually in front of you. And what that will do, and when I say define God, I mean, to the degree that anyone can. Like Chris referenced Ephesians chapter 3, verse 20 in his lesson. Now to him who's able to do far more abundantly than anything we could ask, think, or imagine. Like write that down. He's able. He's, abundant. He's all powerful. He's the creator. Like he raised Jesus from the dead. The things that he's done and that makes you say, wow, God is powerful. God is the most powerful thing there is, and he's the God I serve. So this assignment gives you a visual of, this is what I'm afraid of, but this is the God that I serve. And it shows you, man, my God is so much bigger than the thing that I fear. And so what it does is that it forces you to examine your fears in light of who God is. And when you do that, your fears become less scary and your faith grows in the process. And that's what this whole podcast is all about, is helping your faith to grow, taking these spiritual lessons and driving them home so that you grow closer to God rather than further away from him. So I hope that encourages you. I hope that's useful to you. And I hope you'll actually take that action step. Define your fear, define the Lord to the best of your ability, compare the two. And that should give you a sense of calm and rest and peace and joy and kind of this feeling of abundance in your life of, man, this is the God that I serve, the God that loves me. That's incredible. So do that, and then go to the show notes of this podcast and access the PDF and sit down with your family, whether it's just you and your spouse or your kids, whoever it is, or a friend, and go over page 3 of this PDF that corresponds with this podcast that's called Table Talk. And of course, you don't have to talk about these things around a table, but it just gives you discussion points, questions to ask that help you to have intentional spiritual conversations that relate to the sermon you just heard this week, all in an effort to drive those lessons home and to get you talking about faith intentionally in your home and to really help you draw closer to the Lord. So I hope that helps you. And if it has, like this video or subscribe to this channel, or however you're listening. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, leave a review, a 5-star rating if you would. That just helps us get this out to more people and encourage more people. So take the time to do that. Take the time to go through this table talk discussion and to take that action step too and define who God is, define your fears. I hope that's useful. And I can't wait to see you on next week's episode of the Driving at Home podcast.